From New York to our Bloomberg TV and radio audiences worldwide, this is Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. As we come to air, we're waiting for a tape playback of remarks from President Trump and Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. They've been talking about restarting the economy, specifically in Florida. We'll bring you that as soon as it happens. But in the meantime, let's check in on the markets, because they've been really all over the place today. And for that, we turn to Abigail Doolittle. Really, it's been very volatile today. It
certainly has. We've had stocks all over the map. At the open, we actually had the S&P 500 up about 1.5%. At the lows, down about 0.6%. Right now, down fractionally. And as you can see, taking a look at the NASDAQ, the FANG index, and then Alphabet, the weakness really coming from big tech. And what makes this so interesting, David, of course, is the fact that Alphabet is the first of the big FANGs. Netflix did, of course, report, but Alphabet, among Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook reporting. And it seems as though investors are a little bit jittery. Now, interesting, Alphabet's actually lower on the year, but the FANG index over the last month, even a little bit longer, really leading this rally up more than 20% off the lows. So investors seem to be pulling back just a little bit. They want the proof that that's justified, David.
Yeah, as you say, it's a big week for tech. At the same time, it's every week is a big week for oil, it seems like. That's been a little bit all over the place as well. And I know you're looking at that specifically because the contrast between commodities on the one hand and equities on the other.
Yeah, well, you know, it's really interesting because oil is all over the map, and that's been the case for quite some time. And we, of course, have been talking about the idea, the tale of two economies, stocks pointing to some sort of recovery, oil's crude, the crude crash pointing to something less constructive. But we keep hearing about the difference in contracts. So when we take a look at the contracts, the June contract down 6.5% at about $12 per barrel. The latest news on this, S&P Global exiting, rolling out of that June into July. So July is significantly higher. It's down on the day, but significantly higher at $18 a barrel. August and September, just moments ago, had been higher. Now slightly lower on the day, but when we look at August, it is $21 a barrel, and September, $24 a barrel. So that tells you that crude oil futures believe that the price of crude as time goes on should be higher, perhaps suggesting that the storage issue that we've had more recently, the demand destruction could fade just a bit, possibly catch up with the more optimistic view of stocks. Although, as we've been talking about this tale of two economies, the truth probably lies in the middle. Maybe stocks overall will give back some, and oil will hopefully do what its future contracts suggest, at least right now, David.
Okay, thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report on the markets. In the meantime, as I say, we're waiting for some remarks from President Trump and Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, from their discussions at the White House. And we want to go to Kevin Cirilli, who is there with a report. Kevin?
David, if you can hear me, I'm hearing a major connection issue right now.
Okay, in the meantime, we're having some technical difficulties. Earlier today, Dr. Anothony Fauci of the NIH spoke with our David Rubenstein. Everybody is listening to Dr. Fauci. We should too. This is what he said.
That I think people are going to look at when this is all over. I mean, right away, they had said that this was a virus that jumps species in an animal market, and it only goes from animal to human, and there's no evidence whatsoever that it's transmissible from human to human, and if so, very inefficiently. As they were saying that, weeks before, it was clear that there was human-to-human transmissibility in China now, when we look at it retrospectively. So not only was it bad for the rest of the world, but they hurt themselves, because what they did is soon after the realization that there was this new infection, and to their credit, they put the sequence up on a public website very quickly. But what they also did is, by not letting their own health authorities know that there was transmission from person to person, they held something like a 40,000 person block party in Wuhan, which is the worst possible thing you could do, is to have congregation of people when you have a virus circulating that has a high degree of transmissibility.
So Dr. Fauci, to date, about 55 to 56,000 Americans have died from this. What is the latest in your projections of what the likely death toll will be based on all the modeling that you are now looking at?
Well, David, as I've often said, although models are helpful, they're only as good as the assumptions that you put into the model. And often you can be misled as often as you can be helped. So right now, we're at 55,000. The model now has been upgraded to say, instead of 60,000, it's probably going to be 70,000+. Again, that's an assumption. And the assumption is based on how you respond. And here's what's going to determine how many deaths we have. As we try, and hopefully everyone does it according to the guidelines for opening America again, which were very carefully designed, of which I played a role in making them very conservative and very careful. If, as we open up the country economically and otherwise, if we have the capability to implement well when new cases occur, which they will, there's no doubt that they will, as you try and relax mitigation, if we have the capability of identifying, isolating, and contact tracing in a highly effective and efficient way, then the numbers will stay low. It may be 80,000, whatever, 70,000, like the model says. If we are unsuccessful or prematurely try to open up, and we have additional outbreaks that are out of control, it could be much more than that. It could be a rebound to get us right back in the same boat that we were in a few weeks ago. So that's why we've really got to be careful and very circumspect as we go from a lockdown to a gradual rolling re-entry into some sort of normality.
That was Dr. Anothony Fauci of the NIH talking to David Rubenstein, our colleague, but also, of course, the head of Carlyle Group. In the meantime, we're going to try once again to go back to Kevin Cicilline in Washington, because he is worth the effort, goodness knows, to talk about what's going on between the president and Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Kevin, are you there? What do we know about what's happening at the White House?
Coming in loud and clear. David, here's what I can tell you. The president meeting with Florida Governor DeSantis earlier today, 3 points that I would like to highlight. The first is that the president saying that they are actually considering suspending international travel between Miami and Brazil. And also the second point, allowing for airports on international flights to do immediate types of testing as it relates to COVID-19. So obviously, as we've been reporting for several weeks now, significant changes coming to the airline industry as a result of this, and testing for flights for COVID-19, something that very much appears to be in the early stages in the short term. And then the final point is that the president has also suggested that there's been some type of action taken as it relates to Tyson. And so we don't have the specifics of a potential executive order that the president has signed, but we'll be carefully, obviously, monitoring the president's remarks as it relates to what's happened with Tyson and the meat and poultry industry.
So, Kevin, does the president approve of the way that Governor DeSantis is handling this? He's had some disagreements, for example, with the governor of Georgia, who he thought maybe went too far too fast. Is the governor of Florida complying with his guidelines?
You know, I was struck by this, David, because if you think back to several weeks ago, Governor DeSantis received criticism by many individuals in terms of perhaps not acting as swiftly as other states had hoped. The president saying, alluding to that, and you'll hear this in the tape playback, where he says at one point, you know, people thought that Florida was going to be another northern Italy, and that just hasn't turned out to be the case. So the president defending Governor DeSantis, defending Florida, and of course, you know, Florida, when you talk about Florida in a presidential year, you have to note its political importance. So there appears to be still a strong political alliance between President Trump and Governor DeSantis.
Okay, Kevin Cicilline, thank you so much. He's our chief Washington correspondent, and we'll keep waiting for that tape playback of what President Trump has to say with Governor DeSantis. In the meantime, coming up here, we're going to talk with the man responsible in the House of Representatives for antitrust enforcement about antitrust in the time of the coronavirus. That's coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. When companies get in trouble, often they look around for possible mergers or acquisitions to help them out. But does that apply as well in the time of this coronavirus crisis? We're now welcome Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island. Among other things, he serves as the chair of the Antitrust Subcommittee of the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee. Representative, thank you so much for being with us. You have proposed essentially putting a hold on all mergers and acquisitions for the duration of the crisis. Explain that to us.
Well, I mean, what we want to ensure as we continue to respond to this pandemic is that we support businesses and support workers and families, and particularly small and mid-sized businesses as they navigate this crisis. One of the lessons I think we saw after the Great Recession was there was a tremendous buying opportunities as investors saw companies that were struggling. It led to significant market concentrations, which are obviously not always good for consumers. What we want to ensure is that the antitrust agencies really focus their attention on things that are hurting consumers, like price gouging and hoarding and other anti-competitive behavior, and that we not allow the sort of equity firms and the investor class to take advantage of this pandemic to produce significant market concentration that will disadvantage consumers, reduce choices, drive up prices. I mean, we saw after the Great Recession, particularly in the airline and banking industry, a tremendous consolidation immediately after that that began during that process, during that economic downturn. And so what I'm calling for is, other than mergers and acquisitions that are necessary because firms are truly failing or in bankruptcy so that they're attempting to have a fresh start, that we ought to put a moratorium on other mergers and acquisitions so that there's not this kind of market concentration that occurs as a result of this pandemic. And, the investors are already advising clients that there are great opportunities out there, in fact, describing it as, unique opportunities to invest during this pandemic. And I just think we shouldn't allow that to occur. It's not good for the economy. It's not good long term. And those agencies should be focused on a number of other responsibilities right now.
So, Congressman Cicilline, I saw that Senator Warren proposed legislation today, introduced a bill. Are you signed on to that bill, or do you have a somewhat different approach?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm circulating a letter in the House in the hopes that we will include a merger moratorium in the CARES 2 package. We're currently working on the 5th relief package to respond to the pandemic. That's the vehicle which I think we're most likely to see some moratorium action because it is a legislation which will have to be passed by both the House and the Senate and signed by the President. So my effort right now is to try to get language included in the CARES 2 package that will provide for this moratorium. But legislation is obviously another way to do it, and my guess is we'll have a bill in the House as well at some point.
Congressman Cicilline, as you know very, very well, the reason we have antitrust laws, the Sherman Act was created because there are certain adverse effects of too much concentration, companies getting too big a market share, too big a position in the market. At the same time, there are some advantages from mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes you can keep a company going that otherwise would go out of business. Are you concerned that if we suspend all mergers and acquisitions for an indefinite period of time, we might actually put more stress on some companies and lose more jobs?
No, I don't think that will be the case. In fact, companies that are truly failing would not be covered by the moratorium. What we want to ensure is that investors and those that are sort of in the business of gobbling up companies don't exploit the global pandemic as a way to further consolidate their market share. And the agencies that would have the responsibility of reviewing these mergers and acquisitions ought to be focused on the things that are really hurting consumers right now. As I said, price gouging and hoarding and other kinds of anti-competitive behavior. And again, this is not a permanent moratorium. This is a moratorium during the life of the pandemic so that we ensure that companies are not unfairly increasing their market share and exploiting or taking advantage of a serious public health crisis. So, I look at the danger of the kind of market consolidation that we saw in the banking and airline industries and even in some of the technology sectors after the Great Recession. That kind of market concentration takes a long time to overcome, after it happens. And so making sure that we protect competition, so you protect consumer choice, you drive down costs, you protect innovation. All of those things are implicated when you have the kind of market concentration that can come from the consolidation that occurs during a public health crisis such as this.
Congressman, give us a sense of what's going on with mergers and acquisitions right now, even absent legislation. And there's a Hart-Scott-Rodino, you have to go and wait for certain size mergers anyway for clearance from either the Antitrust Division or the FTC. Are those clearances going through, or have those been suspended? Essentially, are we delaying acquisitions and mergers anyway?
Well, I think merger activity has temporarily slowed, and that's not unsurprising since, kind of much of the economy has come to a standstill. But I think many of the forecasters are forecasting an acceleration of deal making that kind of may really supercharge economic concentration in a number of industries. Equity firms are sitting on a lot of cash, $2.5 trillion of investor cash, and they're, openly speaking about the current landscape of distressed assets and the kind of unique opportunities to invest. So I think what we're trying to prevent is sort of a rush to a whole series of mergers and acquisitions that will produce very unhealthy, very anti-consumer market concentration, and not wait till it's happened, but put in a moratorium so that we can prevent it from happening.
Congressman, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about what's going on with Rhode Island with the coronavirus. We heard about it early on. How are you doing? Is it growing there? What are the actions that are being taken by the governor or others to stop it?
Yes, our governor's doing an extraordinary job. We are, she has really, from the very first days of this pandemic, been very clear about how serious it is and builds up capacity for the surge in terms of 3 hospital sites outside the traditional hospital sector. We are essentially in a stay-at-home order except for essential activities. People are expected to stay home unless there's some really important reason they have to leave. We have the most tests per capita of any state in the country, so we have a very good testing regime, although we continue to have problems getting tests and getting test kits like every state. But we're in the middle of 2 hotspots, in between Boston and New York, so the governor has been very aggressive in trying to protect Rhode Islanders. It's obviously having a devastating impact on our economy, particularly on small business, so we're working every day to try to make sure small businesses in Rhode Island can access the resources that Congress has provided and think about what they need in the next package to make sure that our small businesses particularly survive, the engine of Rhode Island's economy. But it's it's very serious here, as it is, I think, in most parts of the country. One of the great challenges, all across America is we don't have blood-based testing. We appropriated $25 billion in the last emergency relief package, and a requirement that the administration develop a national testing strategy, which I think will make a difference. But I think we're getting through it like every place, but it's ravaging families in our state and obviously really devastating to small businesses.
Congressman, you mentioned how important it is to try to help these small businesses. There's also a lot of concern about helping the states whose budgets have been really devastated, a lot of them, both because of increased costs and also a real slash to revenues. Give us a sense of Rhode Island, because we heard even yet again today from Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin about how we shouldn't be bailing out states that have been profligate with their pensions. I know that in Rhode Island, actually, your governor, Ginny Raimondo, in her earlier job, actually took on the pension issue. Is there a way to give aid to states who have been prudent about their pensions and not so much the ones that haven't?
This is not giving aid to states and cities. What we have been fighting for is to make sure we take care of the heroes that remain on the front lines of this pandemic. And so we're speaking about police officers and firefighters and emergency rescue personnel, and in many states that have county healthcare systems, hospital workers and CNAs and nurses and sanitation workers. So, it's not a question of money to states. It's really it's about resources so that cities and states are not forced to lay off essential personnel that are providing services to the public because they have experienced devastating revenue losses. That's not a result of bad management. That's a result of a pandemic and of government direction to stay at home and effectively shut down the economy. So we tried very hard to get that help in the interim emergency relief package. Senator McConnell refused. The Republicans were unwilling to support that effort. Senator McConnell said states should just go bankrupt, which of course is a terrible suggestion. We have a responsibility to support the heroes on our front line, and I think you can expect that will be included in the CARES 2 package because we need to have states and cities in a position to provide essential services that are necessary. And can you imagine being a state that has a county hospital and you have to lay off hospital personnel in the middle of a pandemic because you can't pay them, or cities that have, like Rhode Island, Providence, or states like Rhode Island, that local governments are responsible for police and fire, having to lay them off because they don't have the resources to pay them. I mean, the federal government has a responsibility to provide help.
Okay. Congressman, I really appreciate your time today. It's Congressman David Cicilline, Democrat of Rhode Island. Coming up here, we're going to talk with Linda McMahon. Her old agency, the Small Business Administration, is in the spotlight right now to get that money out to small businesses. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for Stock of the Hour. One of my favorite tickers, HOG, H-O-G, Harley-Davidson, is up today, not so much because the sales were up, because they got a plan, and Abigail Doolittle is here to explain it all to us. Abigail?
It really is a great ticker, David. One of the most loved tickers out there, that HOG. And today, bulls on Harley-Davidson really liking it as well. That stock soaring, as you just mentioned, up about 12.5%. Its best day in about 3 weeks. Its fifth up day in a row, the longest winning streak since 2019. So the bulls are out on Harley-Davidson, and as you mentioned, it has nothing to do with sales, because sales is simply going in the wrong direction. 5 down quarters in a row, 13 quarters down in the U.S., really speaking to a demographic change. Millennials not really riding those motorcycles. But what we do have rising and moving in the right direction, cash. They are in talks with some of the biggest banks in the country about raising about $1.3 billion in cash to really help out the capital structure. Plus, they are in a round of cost cutting. They're still looking for a new CEO, but other executives there are taking pay cuts and other cost-cutting measures in place. And while there's not a great comp for Harley-Davidson, we have lots of strength right across the automotive complex. We have some of the manufacturers up. We also have Winnebago Industries rallying, that specialty vehicle maker, up about 5.5%. Ford higher. On the year, though, David, it's been a rough one for all of these, including Harley, off of its highs, its 2006 highs, if you can believe it, by about 70%. But today, we certainly have an up day. David?
Okay, good for HOG. Thanks so much to Abigail Doolittle. Coming up here, her old agency, the Small Business Administration, is responsible for getting a lot of money out the door and doing it fast. We talk with former Small Business Administrator Linda McMahon. That's next on Balance of Power. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. We are now seeing some of what President Trump had to say with Governor DeSantis. You can watch that on Live Go. Among other things, he says that he still wants a payroll tax cut. So he's talking about tax cuts over there. In the meantime, let's talk about the Small Business Administration. It is responsible now for really giving checks out, huge checks to a large number of small businesses, a lot of pressure. It's making more loans in a week than it used to have to make in years. We welcome now the immediate past head of the Small Business Administration. She's Linda McMahon, and she's now head of the Trump America First Political Action Committee. Thank you so much, Linda, for joining us today. The President Trump was asked about this yesterday, as you saw at the news conference, because something went wrong with the system. It froze up at the SBA. Do you know what happened? What went wrong? What can be done to fix it?
Well, I can tell you that, first of all, it's, as you said, David, it's an unprecedented number of loans. I think Administrator Carranza said that they processed in 14 days more loans than they processed in the last 14 years. So that's an incredible strain, on a system, even though they have made many upgrades since this program started. But I know that over the weekend they sent notices to the bankers, to the lenders, that they were going to have to pace the system to allow only 350 applications per hour, so that the loans could come in and the money could be widely dispersed throughout the nation. But even with a lot of those preliminary precautions, the system was still inundated, and they did have some glitches, but I think they're fixing those and getting them out. But, the good news is that even in the first round, they got out about 1.6 million loans, and about 1 million of those went to companies that had, 10 employees or less. So it's clearly working. It's not glitch-free, but I do believe that the money's getting out there, and many businesses are getting the money and are very grateful to be able to keep their employees and to keep up and running.
So, Linda, given your knowledge of the system and some sense of how it's being inundated, are you pretty confident we'll get this thing fixed and get it right so the money can get out fairly quickly?
Well, I do believe they're working on that very hard, and yes, I do feel confident they'll be able to do it. And look, I know I've talked to, thousands of small businesses over the last few years, and having been a small business owner myself at one point, I know that it doesn't help much when your business is on the verge of, just collapsing or whatever, when someone says, look, it's going to take another 2 or 3 weeks when it's already been 2 or 3 weeks. So I know that that's an eternity of time for a small business, but it is getting there, and the money, has been prorated, and the president clearly understands about small businesses. And so I think that Secretary Mnuchin and Administrator Carranza have been working very, very hard to get this money first approved in Congress, which it was delayed for a while, by the way, by the Democrats, which didn't help matters. But small businesses are waiting for this money. There are a lot of them desperate for this money, and so it's continuing to be fed out to them.
Linda, as you know, there was a first bill that had $349 billion, as I recall, and then the second one that just came through that's about $370 billion. Do you have a sense whether that's going to be enough? Because as you mentioned, when you were running the SBA, you made an effort to get out to all of your offices all around the country. You know the country pretty broadly.
Well, I don't know how many of the 30 million small businesses there are in this country are actually going to be needing, a hand up or a lifeline, during the time of this, coronavirus. But I know that, the amount of money that's been appropriated, clearly the first tranche went out very quickly, and the demand was still in the pipeline when this second tranche was passed, so that a lot of the requests that were coming in were ones that had been made under the first tranche. So I've heard that we may need more money for small businesses. I think what we're all hoping for, what the president's hoping for, is to get this economy reopened, to get these businesses back open, because that's really what they want. They want to be back in business. They want to be serving their customers. But, of course, in order for them to serve their customers, the customers have to be able to come in. So it's clearly a lot going on as a result of this virus. But I believe the president and Secretary Mnuchin and Administrator Carranza are doing everything they can to make this system run smoothly, to get this money into the hands of small businesses. And many small businesses have said, "Thank God." There's Child's Play Toys up in Sioux Falls, Idaho, and they were saying that even though they weren't open, they still had requests, coming in for toys, for games, for puzzles. You could pick them up at curbside. They were delivering them. And when they got their money from this loan, they were able to keep their employees on board during this time. So, we are hearing those really positive, good stories, and I know that we just need to get the economy and the country reopened again.
Linda, you mentioned how many loans had gone to very small businesses, 10, I think, or fewer employees is what you said. There are some reports that also there are some companies that are pretty big. In fact, there were reports over the weekend that as many as 13 publicly traded companies had turned back something like $170 million in loans that had been made. Do you have a sense whether the overwhelming amount of money is going to the right places, or is a lot of it actually going to people that are not the very small businesses you're talking about?
Well, I know that over the weekend also, and I think before this second tranche went out, Secretary Mnuchin and made it quite clear, and in the new guidance that's out, that these large public companies that have access, to other liquidity are not the people to be getting these loans. And I think that's one of the things the banks now are looking at to make sure, as they're qualifying the people for these loans, the companies for these loans, that these are the ones who really are the small businesses who need it. When large companies get this money, it just sort of defeats. It's demoralizing too for the small businesses. But I'm really glad to see that requirements are being made for that money to be repaid, and that the new guidance will not allow those kinds of companies to get this money.
So obviously the goal here for all of us is to keep as many of these small businesses going as possible. But after we get through keeping them going, their business may well be changed. There may be new costs associated with making sure that customers coming in the door feel safe, new special health precautions being taken. What is your sense about the extent to which this will change the way small businesses do business?
Well, I think that's very true, and I think that's what a lot of smart business owners, are looking at right now. As a matter of fact, that the toy company that I cited, the owner of that, in a recent public interview, had said that she had put her PPP money in a separate account, and she was actually hoping that she won't have to use it because she did have some cash reserves. Now, a lot of small businesses don't have that, and I think though that a lot of small businesses are looking at what they're going to have to do. But I've heard restaurant owners already say, and it makes sense. Look, we've got our overhead, we've got our employees, but even if we open up to 25%, that may not be enough to keep us even, to pay our bills because they have such small margin business. So it's going to be something that we're going to have to look at. I think if there's another tranche of money that's being considered later on, I think we have to look at those particular kinds of businesses that, okay, keeping our employees has been great, and we're happy to have that, but now we just need some direct help. Perhaps we can have I think that the first tranche of money was 25% of the loan could go to overhead for rent and that sort of thing. Well, maybe there's more money that could be allocated to that. Maybe it gets extended beyond the 8 weeks so that small businesses have more of an opportunity, to get themselves back on track.
Linda, finally, you mentioned the fact that you started a small business with your husband. It's not a small business anymore, WWE. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, how's WWE faring in this world? Sports has gotten a lot of pressure put on it.
Well, as WWE reported, I believe it was last week or week before, they'd laid off or furloughed about a third of their workforce, pending, the economy getting reopened. So all businesses of all sizes have to adjust. When you are dealt, this kind of a hand that not only for the president and for the country just, came out of the blue, obviously, but also, for many businesses who had wonderful economies, were up and running, had plans, into the next 2 to 3, 4 years. This has been a real harsh blow. So companies have had, to react to that and reacted smartly. But the small businesses that live from week to week, barely making those small margins, are the ones that I think are taking the biggest hit, and I think those are the ones that have to stay on our radar screen.
Okay, thank you so much, Linda. Really appreciate your being with us. That's Linda McMahon. She's the former head of the Small Business Administration. And now for Bloomberg First Word News, we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Spain is hoping to return to a new normal over the next 8 weeks. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, today said he aims to remove most restrictions on daily life by late June. In a televised address, Sanchez said the process won't follow a strict calendar and will depend on the number of coronavirus infections. Schools in Spain will remain closed until September. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the coronavirus pandemic can be our opportunity to, quote, rebuild our world for the better. The Secretary General said today the outbreak has exposed how fragile societies are, but that at the same time it gives nations a chance to work together on common challenges like global warming. Secretary General Guterres says the only effective response to this worldwide health emergency is, quote, brave, visionary, and collaborative leadership, end quote. The House of Representatives won't return to Washington next week after all. Majority Leader Steny Hoyer told reporters today leaders made the decision after consulting with the House physician. The doctor said coronavirus infection numbers in Washington were still rising and that the region still had hot spots. Hoyer has told House Democrats on a conference call Monday that the House would be in session next week and that votes may be held. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Coming up on Balance of Power, we're going to talk with Catherine Munson. She is the chair of the International Franchise Association about the particular problems the franchisors and franchisees face in the coronavirus crisis. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Well, franchisors and franchisees alike have been really hit hard by the coronavirus. And when it comes to franchises, nobody knows the issues better than Catherine Monson. She is the chair of the International Franchise Association. So, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, give us your sense right now. What are the particular issues that franchisees and franchisors, for that matter, are facing?
Well, the biggest challenges are that the majority of our franchisors and franchisees are not deemed essential businesses. So think about gyms and childcare and hair salons. I mean, they have zero revenue. And then for our members who are deemed essential businesses, even as Fast Signs International is, our Fast Signs franchisees are seeing declines in sales in the U.S. of about 45%, because the only thing they're selling are COVID-19 safety signs and other materials to keep social distancing information out there, et cetera. So from going to robust sales to whether it's down 45% for Fast Signs or whether it's zero because you're in a non-essential business, I mean, that is challenging for any small business.
You talk with an awful lot of these franchisees and franchisors. Do you have a sense that a fair amount of the first $349 billion in the PPP program, or for that matter, the next tranche of $370 billion, is it making it where it needs to go?
You know, really concerning. A recent survey by the International Franchise Association showed only 11% of small franchisees actually received any PPP approval or funds. I know that a very small handful, about 5% of my Fast Signs franchisees received those funds during the first round. And I know from yesterday that the SBA portal crashed multiple times. So I've only heard from 3 or 4 of my franchisees since they opened the portal yesterday that got funding. So deeply concerned. One, if you think about it, there are 30 million small businesses in the U.S. About 15 million of those have employees. I mean, there's just no way where there are only 1.6 million loans given out in tranche 1 that we're even, that we're helping the majority. We just aren't yet. We need to keep those PP funds coming, because I think there needs to be a third tranche and a fourth tranche, because this pandemic is hurting so many small businesses.
Yeah, at the same time, we see issues arise with respect to, for example, bearing the costs of taking precautions for customers. We saw the McDonald's situation where there seems to be a dispute between McDonald's and the franchisees. Is that unique to McDonald's, or are there issues throughout the franchise community about who's going to bear the costs of increasing monitoring and cleanliness and hygiene in these facilities?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, I'm not involved with McDonald's, and I don't know the specifics, but I know that this pandemic is stressful. It's more than stressful. It's stressful times 10,000, and that makes people very, very, very concerned. They're scared. They're terrified. They don't know what to do. Now, I'll tell you, from a Fast Sign standpoint, we've been providing amazing support to our franchisees. We've deferred royalties, 50% deferral now for 4 months, as we try to help our franchisees deal with this cash flow challenge. And we're also doing everything we can to help them, whether it's creating artwork for social distancing signages and teaching them how to make sneeze guards and other safety barriers, and propagating artwork for face shields and things like that. I mean, we have franchisees today that have taken the equipment that they use to cut plastic for signs, and they're making face shields and intubation boxes and intubation shields and safety shields, keeping health workers and other essential workers safe. So I think, the International Franchise Association has a lot of resources to help franchisors and franchisees in all aspects of business operation, including great franchisor-franchisee relationships, but I can't speak specifically to McDonald's.
What about Congress and the role it's played thus far? Because there are reports that actually there have been some specific accommodations made for some franchise operations. Do you feel that you have the ear of Congress?
Well, I think Congress is listening to a lot of folks. I mean, we have a lot of people that are speaking to their senators and to their House members. I know that we are speaking frequently with members of Congress and also the administration, but I also know that conflicting voices are as well. One thing that makes sense to me is that business interruption insurance, which so many businesses have paid for faithfully month after month after month. I realize that viruses are excluded, but that could be a mechanism that Congress could backstop for the insurance companies. To me, there's just logical stuff like that. But when we've advanced that idea, it hasn't yet taken on. I know there are a lot of the different constituents all speaking at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talked actually from somebody from the insurance side of that yesterday on that very issue. And of course, the insurance people that I talked to at least are very much opposed to that. They say that it really doesn't work because the potential liability could be limitless when you shut down the entire economy, that it could be really disruptive of the insurance business. What do you say to that?
Well, I hear what they're saying, but you know, if the U.S. government were to say this is a backstop, we're going to cover those losses from the insurance companies. We're going to do this for a 90-day period only. I mean, there are ways to utilize. I mean, the insurance companies have the mechanism for handling those claims. I understand that viruses are excluded. I get that. But we're trying to find creative ways for the federal government to help small businesses, help all businesses, and every business has been affected.
Okay, Catherine, really appreciate your being with us today. That's Catherine Monson. She is chair of the International Franchise Association. In the meantime, the FOMC is having their first day of two-day meetings today with an announcement coming tomorrow. We're going to talk with our colleague Michael McKee about what we should expect and also about the interview I'm going to have with Alan Greenspan, former chair of the Federal Reserve. That's coming up at 1 o'clock on the second hour of Balance of Power. That does it for Balance of Power for right now. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. The Federal Reserve is meeting even as we speak with a lot of expectation about what they might say or might not say. And we're joined now by our colleague Michael McKee for his view on what we should expect from the Fed. So we get an announcement tomorrow, Mike. What are you looking for?
Well, I'm not really looking for any action, any policy action, David, because at this point the Fed has done so much, cutting rates to zero, 9 new lending programs. But then they did surprise us yesterday by expanding the muni lending program, so anything is possible. But really what we're going to be looking for and what Wall Street's going to want to know is what is the Fed's outlook both for the economy, how bad do they think it's going to get, and how long do they think this is going to last, and how long do they think zero interest rates are going to last. If he can give any guidance on that, it would be helpful for investors, I think. There's a feeling that they might put more of a date on the idea of when they would keep interest rates low until, but it might be a little early for that. They may want to see how things develop.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of disagreement, I think, among some of the regional presidents about exactly what we're going to see in the second half of the year and what we see going into next year. You've talked to some of those people. I talked to one or two, and some of them say, oh no, it's going to bounce back in the second half, and then others are not quite so sure.
Yeah, Mary Daly from San Francisco says we won't see growth until 2021. I think one of the reasons they want to hold off on being very specific is they want to see tomorrow the GDP numbers that we get. Right now we're looking at about a 4% contraction, and then try to extrapolate out what we might see in the second quarter. As Bloomberg News story points out, the worst forecast is for a 65% contraction in the second quarter. And that kind of thing would probably call for more stimulus.
Boy, that's one I didn't see, I have to confess. What about the question of inflation versus deflation? I mean, they're also meeting on the heels of a negative futures number on WTI contracts. Do they have to be concerned a little bit about where we're going with the possibility of deflation?
That's what they're really concerned about now. They're not concerned about inflation. We thought when this might be just a supply problem that it could be inflationary, but it's turned out to be a demand problem, and that leads to deflation. We're already seeing prices go down, and certainly the break-evens on Wall Street have dropped. 2-year is now negative, so nobody thinks inflation is going to be a problem. And that's a partly good thing for the Fed in that it enables them to keep rates low for a long time without worrying about it. But eventually they're going to want to see some inflation because it also helps inflate away some of the debts that we're incurring.
At the same time, given all that they've done, there's precious little more they could do to try to reinsert some inflation into the system, is there?
Yeah, there isn't much. I mean, given the fact that they had interest rates at 0 for 7 years and we didn't see any inflation to speak of, doesn't augur well for what they might be able to do going forward. But there's so much cash in the system, and we are going to see a turnaround at some point in energy prices and other prices. And on a percentage basis, we might see inflation rise. It may not last, it may not be significant, but we'll probably get over 2%, maybe close to 3% in a year or two. That's down the road, but it's something they're going to keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you so much to Michael McKee, our colleague. In the meantime, coming up on the second hour of Balance of Power at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, I'm going to have an exclusive interview with Alan Greenspan, the former chair of the Federal Reserve. That does it for Balance of Power for Bloomberg Television and Radio.